Shalom, welcome to our study of Micah, Nahum, and Habakkuk. We're going to unpack our understanding of the anger of God. This is what I call a lesson 0. It's just a discussion of the historical and cultural context of the books. We're going to actually begin to unpack the book of Micah next week. So Micah, his name means who is like God. He was a contemporary actually of Isaiah, Amos, and Hosea. He prophesied during the reigns of 3 different kings. King Jotham, who was the son of Uzziah, King Ahaz, who was an evil king, and then the righteous King Hezekiah. About 35 years after Micah, Jeremiah even recognized him as a prophet from Morsheth, who prophesied during the reign of Hezekiah in Jeremiah chapter 26, verses 17 through 19. Micah was the first prophet to prophesy about the destruction of Jerusalem. And Jeremiah actually quotes him in Jeremiah 26:18. It's actually the only one of Micah's prophecies to ever be repeated throughout the entire Tanakh. Jerusalem, if you remember kind of your history, was actually destroyed twice. It was destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians, which actually occurred about 150 years after Micah, and it fulfilled Micah chapter 3, verses 11 through 12. It was destroyed a second time in 70 AD by the Romans. In addition to being completely destroyed twice, Jerusalem, not even all of Israel, but just Jerusalem, has been besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, and captured and then recaptured 44 times. It's the most sought after real estate in the history of the entire world. It's also the most conquered nation in history. It's known more time of occupation than independence and freedom. Micah actually prophesied to both the northern and the southern kingdoms, Israel and Judah, but he lived in the southern kingdom of Judah. He prophesied about the destruction of Samaria, which was also the capital of the northern kingdom. In 701 BC, Sennacherib actually invaded Judah, and his general boasted to Judah that none of the gods of any of the nations that they had conquered had been able to save their people. In 2 Kings chapter 19, he actually tells King Hezekiah, the king of Judah, that don't believe God when he says that he's going to spare Judah, because no gods have been able to defeat the mighty gods of the Assyrians. But God did spare Judah, at least for that time being, and Sennacherib actually returned to Assyria and died. There are 3 main messages in Micah. The first one is in chapter 1, verse 2 through chapter 3, verse 1. The second message is in chapter 3, verse 2 through 5, verse 15. The next one, the last one, his third message, is in chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 7, verse 20. The next prophet we're going to study is Nahum. His name means comforter. He actually came about 46 years after Malachi and about 100 years after Jonah. Now, why in the world would we talk about Jonah during Nahum's prophecies? Because just like Jonah, Nahum actually prophesied to Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, 72 years after the northern kingdom is conquered. Between 650 and 620 BC is when he actually prophesied, but there's a lot of discrepancy about that. Some people believe that it's the book of prophecy, and Nahum actually began to prophesy in 615 BC. Other people, though, believe that the book is not actually a prophecy, but it's actually a liturgy written in 612 after Assyria fell. And if we look real quick at the history of Assyria, in 612 BC, there was a mighty army consisting of the Babylonians, the Medes, and the Scythians, and they went in and destroyed Nineveh. Actually, for 2 years, they laid siege on Assyria, on Nineveh. But in the 3rd year, the Kosher River flooded. And when it flooded and the river waters came in, it actually broke down part of the floodgates and part of the city walls. So the floodwaters, combined with this mighty invading army, actually led to the annihilation of Nineveh. And Nineveh was destroyed only 7 years before Babylon began to siege the southern kingdom. Fast forward a lot of years, and in 331 AD, Alexander the Great actually fought at Arbela, which was a site very, very close to where Nineveh was. And he actually had no idea that a city had even existed in that spot. That's how utterly annihilated Nineveh was. But if you look at Nahum chapter 1, verse 1, it states that the book is an oracle. It's a burden. It's a prophecy of Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. So I tend to take scripture at its word and to say that Nahum isn't a liturgy, but it's a book of prophecy. And during the time of Nahum's prophecy, Assyria was actually at its height of power and wealth, and it assumingly lived behind impenetrable walls. Nahum is traditionally thought to be from a city of Alakesh, but there's a lot of even controversy about its location. Some people believe it's in modern northern Iraq. And now there was a Jewish population there until 1948 when they were completely expelled. There's also a temple which supposedly houses the tomb of Nahum. But there are two other places that also claim to house the tomb. One is in Galilee and one is on the West Bank. And oddly enough, in 2019, President Trump actually pledged $500,000 to restore not only the temple, but also the tomb of Nahum that's located supposedly in Iraq. I, however, believe that Alakesh is in northern Galilee. Because also in Nahum chapter 1, verse 1, Nahum is referred to as an Elkoshite. And the city of Elkosh was actually renamed Kefer Nahum, the city of Nahum. And he was born right on the heels of Nahum. He prophesied between 621 and 609 BC. Born right after the prophet Zephaniah, he was a contemporary of the beginning part, at least, of the prophet Jeremiah. He prophesied toward the end of King Josiah's reign, who was the very last righteous king. He prophesied about 4 years before Daniel and only 16 years before Ezekiel. Now, the reason he's so controversial is because very, very little is known about him. His name actually appears only twice in all of the scriptures, in Habakkuk 1:1 and in Habakkuk 3:1. We never see a mention of his hometown, nor his tribe, his parents, or his background. Everything we know about him or we surmise about him are about the dates based on historical facts that he mentions or the prophecies that he prophesies about. For an example, the Chaldeans defeated the Assyrians in 612 BC. But Habakkuk prophesies about the Chaldeans and not the Assyrians. So we know that his prophecies took place after 612 BC. Chapter 3 is considered a song. It's written very much in a poetic style. So some speculate that because of that, he must have been a Levite, since they would have included men who served as musicians and songwriters in Solomon's temple. But we just don't know. There's some very, very interesting speculation, though, about who Habakkuk might be. In 2 Kings 4, chapter 8 through 17, this is what we read. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat some food. And so it was, as often as he passed, he would turn in there and eat. She said to her husband, "Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Please, let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let's put a bed in there for him, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, and it'll be that when he comes to us, he can turn in there." So one day he came and he turned in the upper chamber and he rested. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call the Shunammite." And when he called her, she stood before him. And he said to him, "Say now to her, behold, you've been careful for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Would we be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army?" And she answered, "No, I live among my own people." So he said to her, "What then can be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Truly, she has no son, and her husband's old." So Elisha said, "Call her." And when he called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, "At this season next year, you will embrace a son." And she said, "No, my Lord, oh man of God, don't lie to your maidservant." But the woman conceived and bore a son that season the next year, just as Elisha had said to her. Now the big speculation is that this son of the Shunammite woman could be Habakkuk, because in verse 16, Elisha says that the woman will embrace a son. And the root of Habakkuk names, Chet Bet Kaf, mean to embrace. Now there's absolutely nothing in Scripture or in history that supports the claim, but it's a very interesting speculation for a prophet that we really know nothing about. Within his 3 chapters, Habakkuk actually contains 2 complaints. In chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, is his first complaint, and then God answers him in chapter 1, verses 5 through 11. His second complaint is in chapter 1, 12 through chapter 2, verse 1, and then God answers Habakkuk's complaint in verses 2 through 20. Chapter 3 is actually Habakkuk's response, his beautiful poetic response to God's answers. Now, even though Habakkuk is never directly quoted in Scripture, there are some echoes of his messages. Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 actually echoed in Malachi chapter 3, verses 13 through 15 about why the wicked prosper. In Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4 is his very famous scripture, "The righteous will live by faith." This is actually repeated by Paul in Romans 1:17 and Galatians 3:11. It's repeated again by the writer of Hebrews in chapter 10, verse 38. Now, history records that this verse, that when read by Martin Luther, is what propelled him to question the popular teachings of his time and actually led to the Reformation. So that's really all I have for you as far as the historical and cultural context of these 3 books. So I hope you found this information interesting and helpful as you begin to unpack the truths of these prophetic books. If you're studying with us and have a book, we will discuss lesson 1 next week. If you don't have a book, read Micah chapters 1 through 2 to prepare for our discussion. Please visit my YouTube channel. My profile picture is in a blue circle. I actually have over 80 videos posted. Be sure to like and share any of my videos. And if you'd like automatic notifications when new videos are posted, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button below. As always, I'd really love to hear from you guys, so be sure to leave comments or questions in the box below. If you're watching this video via my Facebook page, be sure to let me know in the comment section or just add a thumbs up icon. Until next time, Shavua Tov, have a great week, and Shalom, Shalom.